Are we visible? Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, dear colleagues, dear students, allow me to introduce our guest from Portugal, Mr. Vitor Guerreiro. It's our friend. Vitor Guerreiro teaches at the Portuguese University in Porto. He's philosopher, maybe a little bit musician, philosopher of music, aesthetician. And I must say that Vitor is one of the establishing or founding members of European Network of Philosophy of Music. So we organized a very nice conference in Porto. It was starting conference in this year, and I was on this conference too. So we are very pleased with your coming, and we are looking forward to your lecture, which is going to be about art and artwork and many very, very interesting issues. So you have your time.
Before we start, I would like to, I will most likely embarrass myself, but I have to do this, if you don't mind, before we start with the material. Dobrý deň, ďakujem vám všetkým, že ste tu. Chcem vyjadriť svoju vďaku svojim hostiteľom tu v Prešove, ktorí boli ku mne takí ústretoví a láskaví. Is that okay? Zvlášť ďakujem Adrianovi, Slavke a Tomášovi za to, že môj pobyt tu bol úžasný. Zo srdca vám ďakujem. Ďakujem від щирого серця. Against monolingualism in academia. So, now I'm sorry to have put you in this uncomfortable situation. I hope this lecture is going to be at least minimally useful and somewhat fun for you. You may be wondering about you're not wondering because you know them, the posters for the lecture. Whoa. What happened? Oops. Okay. By the way, I love these posters. When I found them spread around the faculty, I was, enchanted. So, structure of the lecture. I'll start to present, because I have this tendency to get a little bit lost sometimes. I'll put my conclusions beforehand, explain some central concepts and ideas that are going to be, if I speak too fast, if you don't understand something, if you want me to clarify, repeat, please. I tend to. Then I present an argument of sorts. It's not really like a piecemeal deductive argument for a very small conclusion or set of conclusions. It's more like a story I'm going to tell you, which I hope will abductively make sense. What do I mean by that? That would work as a solution or a way of, would be a better way of approaching things, as I'm going to put them. A few illustrations, and then in the end, if we have time, back to the conclusions. So what are the conclusions here? I may have a lot of conclusions, probably not enough arguments for all of them, but at least to make clear where I want to go with this thing of understanding, imaginative understanding, cognitive value in art. So cognitivism, one of the ideas, cognitivism about the arts is a more powerful explanation of their value than hedonism. So hedonism, the idea that the value of art resides in some special sort of pleasure it affords us. So I'm going to with the idea that no, cognitive value is the thing. A plausible form of cognitivism takes imaginative understanding under an Aretaic model, I will explain what this is, as the core value. Not all virtue theoretic models are properly Aretaic models. Aretaic from arete, excellence, virtue, you probably know this from Nicomachean ethics, virtue ethics. So, Collingwoodian expression, because I'm going to base this partly on Robin George Collingwood's theory of art. I don't know if anyone is familiar with the book 1936, The Principles of Art by Robin George Collingwood, British philosopher. not only of art, but anyone? Okay, good. The question of art, so another issue that I want to put here is that the question of art versus non-art is a dead weight. We'll see why. And if I have the time, which I most likely will not, I put this in the abstract as a second part of the talk. That's just too ambitious. Perhaps surprisingly, this view of expression is compatible with a Goodmanian view of how an artwork works. If we have the time, I will go into that, because to me it is important it would be important to show how a view largely based on Collingwoodian principles would still connect with contemporary theories of art and art meaning and art understanding, of which Goodman's is one of them. Anyone knows Goodman, Nelson Goodman, Languages of Art, 1968? Okay, we're good. So, in case I don't manage to reach the end, you know where I want to go and we can talk about that. The central concepts here are going to be that of expression. So, imaginative understanding. It's not a term that you find in the Principles of Art by Robin George Collingwood. I'm basing myself on other authors, namely the person who got me into this path in the first place, David Collins, to whom I cannot thank enough, but also Robert Hopkins' paper of 2017, precisely on imaginative understanding. It is a paper on Collingwood on the role of imagination in understanding art. Craft theories of art and expression. This is the Collingwood's critique of the standard theories of art of his time and also of our time, I'm going to argue. So craft versus art. I'm going to explain exactly what this amounts to. Magic and amusement are the two crafts, two of the three crafts that Collingwood contrasts with art proper. And he tries to explicate all these concepts. Magic and amusement are the things that usually get confused. People confuse these things with art proper. Teleological versus Aretaic model. None of this is in Collingwood. This is me superimposing here a talk about ways of understanding value. We talk about values all the time, our preferences, what justifies our preferences, and then there are frameworks to think about value. You may be familiar with them from normative ethics. We'll get to that. Corruption of consciousness is a Collingwoodian term, is the equivalent to bad art. Bad art just is corruption of consciousness. To successfully express oneself is to be successful in a constant struggle against the corruption of consciousness. This has a serious Scrutonian ring to it. Has nothing to do with that, but we'll get to the explanation. If anything is unclear and you want we have only 1 hour and there are questions in the end, but if for some reason you need to intervene. And I'm going to go through the critique, if I can, critique of the aesthetic emotion, which is a concept of early 20th century formalists like Clive Bell, if you are acquainted with the book Art, 1914, and Roger Fry, an essay on aesthetics. Aesthetic emotion is a term by Clive Bell. They were members of the famous Bloomsbury group. And there is a passage of the Collingwood's principles devoted to the critique of the notion of aesthetic emotion, which I think is important as a tool to move to other places. I'll explain that later on. So, first of all, a slide to distinguish expression from a common phenomenon that could be confused with expression, sentimentality. This is a little excerpt from John Berger. All bad painting is sentimental, but when one compares present academic painting with Victorian or Soviet art, one sees the different nature of their sentimentality. The worst of Victorian painting sentimentalized spiritual yearning. The worst of Soviet painting sentimentalized the achievements of labor. We, at our worst, sentimentalized cheesecake, a virgin, a Stakhanovite, a mannequin. These are the different heroines. So just a little bit contrast, so to mark expression proper from things that usually get confused with expression. I'm going to speak about another topic, which is the way we usually think about expression and the usual theories to explain, for instance, musical expression. The resemblance theory or arousal theory. And these nicely fit what Collingwood would call craft theories of expression. It doesn't speak about this in this vocabulary, but we can use this vocabulary to make sense of what still is going on in current analytical aesthetics. Okay. So, the philosophical landscape, which I'm going, but basically this is about my own personal project. 3 concepts here: art, aesthetic, and expression. None of them is easy to explain. We talk about art and the aesthetic this and aesthetic that all the time, being expressive of this, expressive of that, but it's very hard to pin down, to explain. If one asks, okay, what is the difference between something that is aesthetic and something that is not? This is very hard to explain. Philosophers have been trying to do this for a long time. Nor is it easy to explain how they relate. So there is this thing I call the grand project in aesthetics that has been focused especially on the first 2 concepts. So, definition of art, to explain the nature of art, what binds together all those things that we treat as art or call art or we put in museums, etc., galleries. What's the nature of the aesthetic? Can we use the aesthetic to explain the nature of art? Aesthetic theories of art. So art, something is an artwork if and only if it's intended to generate aesthetic properties from a base of non-aesthetic properties, those sorts of, or to generate aesthetic experiences, so that sort of thing. So now a doubt. This is my doubt. Oh, sorry. Suppose the grand project goes down the drain. What happens to aesthetics? What do I mean goes down the drain? I'm thinking about recent papers that have surfaced in the last years, like skeptical, articulating skeptical views of the possibility of defining the concept of art, or even using the concept of art. There are papers on elimination of the concept of art. Remember my talk in Tallinn. And also, recently, if you check James O. Young's paper in Erkenntnis about the elimination of the aesthetic, do we need the concept of the aesthetic? What conceptual work exactly is the concept doing for us? And he throws skepticism on the usefulness of the concept. So I'm not taking a position on these matters. Okay, the grand project has 2 great, or how should we call it, wings. If you I'm missing the word now in English. That go back to the 18th century project of explaining the special character of the aesthetic judgment. So, one of them is focused on the aesthetic mental state. Okay? The aesthetic experience, the aesthetic attention, the aesthetic whatever that explains our aesthetic life. The other one is focused on aesthetic objects or properties, so realists about aesthetic properties. So this is basically the grand project that people like Young are attacking. I'm not taking position on that. For the sake of the argument, suppose the grand project goes down the drain. Does this mean, like Scruton asks in his 2007 paper, aesthetics lacks a subject? Okay, here's an idea. Maybe expression is enough to steer the boat. I'm going to work with that. Oh, sorry. I'm going backwards. Okay. Cognitivism. What is cognitivism about the arts? So it's one of 2 ways of thinking about aesthetic/artistic value. I'm not going to get here into the question of does our aesthetic value and artistic value break apart? That's a huge discussion. I'm not going to go into it. Hedonism, so the view that searches for the base of value in some aesthetic quale, or as Goodman would put it, a tingle. So some qualitative aspect of experience. It's contrasting with, for instance, knowledge or insight. So something cognitive in nature. Okay, because we tend to think of cognitive value in terms of propositional knowledge. Okay, how do I get knowledge from works of art? So, does anyone know about the Stolnitz's skeptical arguments about the cognitive value of art? The paper from the early 90s. Okay, basically it's an argument by an American aesthetician. You can boil it down to this. Look, Artworks give us knowledge, but only trivial knowledge. Okay? Knowledge such that if you don't know it already, you cannot even interpret the work. You don't know how to approach the work. So, like stuff like a moral story, the lesson you read a novel and then you extract a lesson, some profound truth that you can put in a propositional form. That would be trivial. If you do that with a novel, you reach some trivial proposition, and it will be presupposed by your ability to understand the novel. So it's not going to give you. Artworks cannot give you propositions. They cannot give you arguments. They cannot provide evidence for contrary views supposedly embodied in other artworks. So this is the idea. Now, neocognitivism, this is a term by John Gibson, is a way to describe approaches that do not go with propositional knowledge as the model of cognitive value. So, for instance, there's a whole debate in epistemology about the distinction between understanding and knowledge. Are they the same thing? Are they not the same thing? So, for instance, there are varieties of understanding. Understanding that, if I'm understanding that it is such and degrees in this room. So that's the same as propositional knowledge. But then you have things like objectual understanding. I understand the Prague metro system, or something like that. Now, what we're going to introduce here, based on Collingwood, is the idea of imaginative understanding. So understanding with your imagination. What's this? Oh, I tend to go. Okay, art and expression. Art properly so called, this is the Collingwood's thesis, art properly so called is expression. The issue, what's this? I'm repeating myself? No. Okay. No, I'm not repeating myself, sorry. So this is Collingwood's thesis, art properly so called is expression. However, something I introduced in my talk in Tallinn, which Adrian witnessed, is that this is a dead weight, okay? The issue of art versus non-art is a dead weight. It will take us nowhere. We are better off getting rid of that weight. This is not the same as me agreeing with the eliminativists saying we should get rid of the concept of art. That's not it. The point is, Collingwoodian expression, this phenomenon Collingwood calls expression, is a real phenomenon and epistemically interesting one on its own terms. And here's a thought. This is what I do. Let us pay attention to the normative structure of the act of expression, as he described it. What is this normative expression? Normative structure, sorry. Collingwood is criticizing what he calls the craft theories of art. What are craft theories of art? Theories that equate art with some form of productive labor, just like any other productive labor. So activities for which certain distinctions apply. The distinction between means and end, planning and execution, where there is a reverse relationship between means and ends in planning and execution, between raw material and finished product, between form and matter, and hierarchical relationship between several crafts, meaning one craft produces the tools for the other craft. What does this all mean? Instrumental reasoning. So, teleological model to conceive of value. So, if you remember these things or if you have found them in normative ethics, a teleological approach, an example of which is consequentialism or utilitarianism, so a view of value that puts emphasis on consequences. Deontological views put emphasis on rules, like Kant's ethics. Aretaic approaches put emphasis on virtues. They are agent-based, so they all posit the same entities, but the flow, direction of explanation is not the same. So virtue theorists will say, it is good that which is typically done by the virtuous agent. Okay. I'm going to use this. I'm not going to go into the deontological. Okay. There's probably one attempt in recent analytical aesthetics. If you go to this recent papers by James Shelley, especially his last, I think it is more recent, 3-page paper, Simple Theory of Aesthetic Value. it fits what I would call a deontological model, but I still have to explore it. Am I wasting too much time? Okay. No. Okay. Aretaic. I'm going to go with, okay, Collingwood offers us, he didn't think about it. This is not in Principles of Art, in the 1936 book, but it's something we can clearly see that's there. An Aretaic structure as opposed to different ways of conceiving art, value, and expression. Okay, so I come up with this model to look at actions, activities, practices, which is taken from an epistemology book, Ernest Sosa, the AAA structure, aptness equals accuracy by way of adroitness. This is connected with virtue epistemology. So imagine, for any action in which a successful action in which we value the achievement of the goal by way of adroitness, by way of capabilities, virtues, skill. So an action with such a structure is apt if it is accurate, successful, by way of adroitness. I mean, imagine that I shoot the arrow, and then a gust of wind pulls the arrow in one direction, and then another gust of wind moves the arrow again, and it hits the target, bullseye. But, however, it was successful. There was adroitness because supposedly I'm an archer, I have the right skills. Yet the result, it was disconnected. So it's like the Gettier problem. Justification in knowledge got disconnected by the introduction of luck. So this has to do with a discussion, which is not my discussion. I'm not mentioning this to go into that. But I look at this structure. Okay, aptness equals accuracy by way of adroitness. This is the structure of all actions that we will likely feel tempted to apply the concept of art. This was my point in Tallinn. So there is this famous Portuguese guitar player who would speak of his learning the art of his father, who was a miller. See? Any action that requires skillful performance will have this component. So what did I think? I called it wide Aretaic model. We'll see why. For any practice P, from praxis, under that model, the wide Aretaic model, the phrase, the art of P is bound to make some sense. Any theory of art, now, this is what I thought of. Any theory of art can be rephrased under this model. All we have to do is to insert the values of the theory into the accuracy and adroitness. So treat the positions in that formula as slots and then put there the values of any theory. For instance, here's Nick Zangwill's theory of aesthetic creation. Nick Zangwill is an important contemporary formalist about art. So he defends what we call an aesthetic theory of art. So the purpose of the function of an artistic object is to generate, to sustain aesthetic properties. So I'm changing his definition of art to fit this formula. An action is successfully artistic, so that's aptness, when it results in the production of an artifact that sustains certain aesthetic properties on account of having certain non-aesthetic properties. But for instance, it is elegant because it is such and such and such, blue, square, curvy, whatever. So this is how it works, the covariance of kinds of properties. Due to an insight of the artist had on how these two sets of properties would relate. So the artist had this insight about how making an object such and such would generate aesthetic properties such and such. So you can pick this theory and fit it. You can do that with any theory. So what I'm trying to say with this is any one of these theories will capture something of the way we spontaneously tend to use the concept of art, and it responds to this model. So what I'm also trying to say with this is that it kind of makes our efforts to define art useless. So we could say, okay, I could follow Collingwood all the way down here and say, okay, expression is the thing. Art defines expression defines art. But wouldn't it be better to have just, okay, a normative approach in which maybe this phenomenon, expression, is something that things we call art can achieve, and when they achieve it, they are a focus of value, but that's not the whole of the story. So, and we can stick with a more interesting phenomenon, which is Collingwoodian expression. This is my idea. So, now, we saw the wide Aretaic model. Now, a narrower structure, which I called narrow Aretaic model. Collingwoodian expression as a further specification / restriction or a peculiar structural feature. What is this? It's accuracy or hitting the bullseye. We do not know what it counts as such until we've done it. In doing it, we discover that it is so. So the artist doesn't choose, select. This is Collingwood's view. It doesn't select, like for instance, an emotion like, to express, and then goes about selecting the materials and the means to achieve that end, that predetermined end, like in a craft. What he does is, there is something, okay, something fixes his attention on, okay, that there's a pattern there, so I'm trying to capture, I'm interested in that pattern formed by those things, so I'm drawing them or painting them, whatever. And I will work with the medium, and my work with the medium will be an attempt to clarify to myself what that feeling is. So I am trying to discover what is hitting the bullseye. And when I do it, I will know it, not before. So this is Collingwood's idea. And this is a new way of conceiving purposeful action. It's purposeful. It also satisfies the wide model, but only, okay, all things we call art satisfy the wide model, but only Collingwoodian expression or things that have this additional structure satisfy the narrow model. Okay, then we have before art, or I mean, Collingwood makes a list of things that usually get mixed up with art. Magic, simply, for instance, political propaganda is magic. You have a predetermined end, you make something that will work, the purpose is to work well. In the case of propaganda, the purpose is to have some effect in the wider life of society. In the case of amusement, it's meant to be discharged in the experience itself. Okay, I'm watching a cartoon. Okay, it doesn't mean that cartoons cannot be expressive art. This is just okay. I'm watching some piece of amusement, and the purpose is it is directed. The focus of psychic energy is directed to the experience, it's not meant to have. Aristotelian catharsis is a model for this. Okay, because you're supposed to discharge the tragic emotions in the act, but they are not so that they don't contaminate the rest of social life. So it's the reverse of magic. Magic, social ritual, political propaganda, but all the things we do to preserve, keep the morale necessary to sustain social life. You could include weddings, funerals, all sorts of rituals that involve some, we could call it aesthetic component. Okay. And then representation, for instance, you can, mimetic. An artist produces a likeness, but to produce a likeness is not to produce an artwork. Okay. An artist paints a portrait. It can present the commissioner with a likeness of the sitter, but it can also be an artwork if it is expressive. Now, okay. Expression or art proper for Collingwood all these things, they can, overlap. They can overlap. So you can have something which performs the functions of propaganda, but still as an element of art. The thing is, what makes it art, if it really has that element, it's not what makes it propaganda. See? And the same with amusement. Amusement can have elements of expression, but what makes them expression is not what makes them. It's not what makes them amusement. So we can speak just of magic and amusement, because as a rule, all of those, the first two work by way of representations. You produce a representation that will have either a magical or an amusing effect. This is, okay. I went through this. So paradigms. they are distinguished by the direction of fit, adjustment of focus of psychic and emotional energy. Okay, and then Collingwood has this thing against the addiction to amusement. He sees it as a civilizational problem, and so to which art would be the remedy, not just for the corruption of consciousness, but also to this problem of the addiction to amusement. Okay, corruption of consciousness equals bad art. This has nothing to do with the distinction between and popular or mass art. What are we going to do to understand the notion? This philosopher who wrote a paper in 2001 on virtue aesthetics, which David Collins very aptly criticizes in his master's thesis about Collingwood, defines aesthetic courage. I mean, I'm not taking anything from the theory except this, his notion of aesthetic courage. I'm not proposing that there's a specific kind of courage that is aesthetic, but he defines it like this: as the ability, aesthetic courage is the ability to face what a work tells us about ourselves and about reality. So, if successful expression is to be understood in Aretaic terms, so is the corruption of consciousness, not as a terrible consequence of having done something badly, but rather consisting itself in that doing badly. Okay? Each successful act of expression is a constant struggle with the corruption of consciousness. How can I explain this in a way, through an analogy? I'm writing a paper. This is not an artistic case. I'm writing a paper and I put there some references. Okay? And then at some point I realize, am I putting these references because they are necessary for the argument? Or am I including these references to meet some idea of I'm such a knowledgeable person, or I know this, or I know that? Or are they really playing a role in the... So the struggle, in artistic work, the struggle with the corruption of consciousness is similar to this, in the sense that we are going after genuine expression, so which means to face even those emotions or those feelings of affections that it would be more comfortable to disavow, to bowdlerize, to cherry pick, if you know what I mean. And this idea, corruptions of consciousness are always partial and temporary lapses in an activity which on the whole is successful in doing what it tries to do. I'm not going to go too much into the notion of corruption of consciousness and what he understands by the death of a civilization. As I said, this has nothing to do with the Scrutonian fears that we are getting so decadent. Actually, Collingwood says, this is nothing that involves the waving of flags or the shooting of enemies. We begin to see that it has happened in stillness, looking back. But I'm not going to focus on the idea of the corruption of consciousness. The death of civilization as a result of the corruption of consciousness. Corruption of consciousness is the inability to express oneself successfully. So this is enough. I have a few examples of what we usually, what's expressive in art. This could be an example, Sturm und Drang. Although this is from the 17th century, it's really a detail from painting in the National Gallery, Francisque Millet. So the outpouring of strong emotions. So I'm using here the idea of the lightning bolt as an allusion to Sturm und Drang. You could also think of, expressive in virtue of content, because here, this is at I forgot the name, doesn't matter, it's a manor house in London with a lot of paintings. Kenwood House. Joseph Wright of Derby, you can feel, it expresses something sinister. What are they going to do with a cat? So I think we could think of paintings like this. This is in Romania, in Bucharest, National Museum of Fine Art, oral pop impetus, the sort of painting we would intuitively call expressive for the features that having to do with dynamic. Why am I pulling this up? Because following David Collins here, we can see expression not necessarily connected to emotions, and Collingwood didn't exactly see it that way, but the vocabulary he uses to describe his ideas could pull us in that direction. So Expression could be expression of perspectives, of emotional charges on perceptual experiences, feelings of movement in space, and how we, for instance, when we read Fugue in Two Colors, musical analogies with the movement of lines, abstract expression of bodily movement and struggle, okay, dynamic tension. Here I was actually thinking of a musical analogy with Debussy's Voile, the sensation that the sounds are fluttering. Okay? And it really doesn't depend on the title. It has a title, Voile, which could be sails or veils. But really it owes its expressive features partly to the fact that it's written whole tone scale, no tonal center, ambiguities, also features of dynamic that produce that effect. So the point of the expression could not even be the subject matter. It could even be what different things we feel when we look at the image. So this is serenity, orderly, as opposed to you could think of maybe an analogy here would like a futurist poem about sailing, and actually my comparison here would be with a Portuguese poet and two of his heteronyms, but I'm not going to go into that. Also expressive, the idea here, we are making a new world. This is a painting by an English painter from the generation of between the wars. He was a fighter in the First World War. You look at this painting and you see these figures that resemble perhaps parts of corpses, human arms, or monoliths. The idea of something that has gone terribly bad and the human presence has become merely a spectral. And also suggestive of violence. For instance, you can. Anyone knows this? This is an example used by Catherine Elgin. It's by Alighieri Boetti. It's a work from the 70s, Arte Povera. So these are brands of paint used in different types of motorbikes, and then you have groups of people that are fans of motorbikes, and a very tight rivalry between them. And so this articulates the idea of that sort of rivalry implies proximity, so the proximity of the color. So this also counts as expression. So it's not just the outpouring of emotions. And now a passage from Collingwood that to articulate perhaps a little bit better what I'm trying to articulate. So everyone that supposes, is a passage in the Principles where he speaks of Cézanne. Everyone that supposed that painting was a visual art, that the painter was primarily a person who used his eyes and used his hands only to record what the use of his eyes had revealed to him. Then came Cézanne and began to paint like a blind man. His still life studies are like groups of things that have been groped over with the hands. He uses color not to reproduce what he sees in looking at them, but to express almost a kind of algebraic notation, what in this groping he has felt. His landscapes have lost almost every trace of visuality. Trees never look like that. That is how they feel to a man who encounters them with his eyes shut, blundering against them blindly. So this is a perfect example of expression without it being the case that we're talking about outpouring of emotion or producing something with a certain contour that will make for a recognizable expression of a specific emotion, love, hate, rage, etc. So I'm going to skip this one. It's important, the idea that expression differs radically from denotation. It's more than communication. It's a sharing of imaginative understanding. And the artist has a very limited control over what the artwork, what the work means. So, to put this idea perhaps somewhat more clearly, here's an example from Eddie Zemek. It's a paper on the meaning in music. It is one thing to be driven to irritation or appeased by a musical piece, or to associate a dynamic profile or melodic contour with an emotion or feeling that one names. Okay, it has descending short intervals, sad, something like that. Okay? This is not a quote from Zemek, it's just my description. Go. It is quite another thing to understand through the music, so following the music, that rage may internally evolve into peaceful acceptance. Okay? So this is more the kind of thing that's at stake. Okay. An important thought by also this author, the idea that the anthropomorphic perception of form. Even abstract art is truly anthropomorphic. A visual or melodic line is seen as striving, ascending, climbing, gaining in power, becoming carefree, frolicking, then carefully maintaining a tense, precarious balance, eventually losing control, falling down, crushed, vanquished, disintegrating, dying out, and then emerging miraculously, coming back to life, triumphing over its adversaries, reasserting itself gloriously, making peace and restoring, etc. The idea is we perceive formal structures of artworks anthropomorphically. Okay, and this is important building block of expression. Cooperation between artists and audience, so artists and audience share. Okay, the idea here of imagination being, understanding being imaginative, that it's not about recognizing, like imagine. Okay, we have this, what Collingwood calls the psychic field of experience. Like every sequence of affections that we undergo in a particular experience is, no one else can experience that. So how do we bring that into how do we give that expression a conscious form? So without referring to it as, okay, it's not the same as subsuming it under a concept, giving it a name, okay, rage, love. So I'm going to produce some piece that has this contour and is going to be recognized. This is the craft theory of expression. So I select an emotion and I try to make a final craft product that will be recognized as an instance of that emotion, just like I could read the word love and think about the concept of love or the rage or whatever. So to understand imaginatively is to connect a pattern of affections and sensations from our experience with appropriate sensory and affective profiles. This is from the paper by Hopkins, tracing correspondences between quite different situations that have some of these profiles in common. So the idea, every experience that we have will be associated with, okay, for every situation, sensations and affections. What it would be like, say, I'm looking at the square, or maybe it's not a square, maybe it's a cubic form or a trapezoid from a certain angle. So, and I have this, imagination provides me with a synthesis. For me to have proper experience of an object that's three-dimensional, I have to have present in my imagination, sorry, all of the object's aspects that are not being, okay, I know that every side of the object that I'm not seeing is part of the experience. So that's the role of imagination. And artworks are the occasions for exercise of that kind. So what do I mean here by the critique of aesthetic emotion? Sorry. This is a quote from Clive Bell in the book Art from 1914. It seems to me possible, though by no means certain, that created form moves us so profoundly because it expresses the emotion of its creator. It is tempting to explain the difference between significant form and beauty, that is to say, the difference between form that provokes our aesthetic emotions and form that does not, by saying that significant form conveys to us an emotion felt by its creator and that beauty conveys nothing. This is interesting because it is a part of the book, Clive Bell's book, where he approximates, although we see Clive Bell as a formalist, he proposes this idea of the significant form is features of the object that exclude representational or the symbolic, so configurations of lines, patterns of colors, pigments, etc., that bear a sort of meaning that is different from that is linguistic meaning or any sort of symbolic meaning. And here, so as the significant form, so what is art is that which has significant form. Significant form, you know that significant form is significant form because it generates aesthetic emotion. And what is aesthetic emotion? Aesthetic emotion is that which is generated by the experience of significant form. It's a circular argument. So, but you could put this into some sort of supervenience thesis. Okay, there are more than one. There isn't one. There are no rules to produce significant form. There are many ways to realize aesthetic properties. So the aesthetic profile of any object will be, we will call it its significant form. Now, the important thing here is the critique. So this is Clive Bell and Roger Fry. I'm not, okay. Collingwood's critique of the notion of aesthetic emotion is interesting here because of either the aesthetic emotion, so this idea that is, authors like Peter Keavy, for instance, who a musical formalist, who still kind of reused the notion of aesthetic emotion from Clive Bell in the idea that the only emotion you feel, people, there's this error theory in the appreciation of music that people think they feel emotions, but they're not actually feeling emotions. What they feel, they have a specific emotion which is about the beauty of the music, but this has nothing to do with garden variety emotions. So, and here is the critique of Collingwood's critique to this notion of aesthetic emotion. Either so it's in the form of a dilemma. Either the aesthetic emotion is a particular emotion among the several kinds of emotion experienced by artists, which they select for expression, or it consists simply in the specific feeling entailed by successful expression. Now, since the work of expression doesn't start with a decision of what emotions to express, then either that brand of formalism that appeals to aesthetic emotions is confined to the WAM model, so teleological, that craft theories of expression, selection of predetermined emotional states to configure in an object so that the viewer will recognize that predetermined pattern. Is confined to the WAM model. Or according with the NAM model, so expression under the Aretaic model, so any emotion can be an aesthetic emotion. So this was the basis. For instance, this is from here you can any feature connecting to wider reality. So when we look at the sorts of properties that tend to be considered artistically relevant, they can be divided into three sorts. We call it the formal, the expressive, and the symbolic representational. What we sometimes call the Ziblian properties, going back to Frank Zibley's paper of 1959, are a combination of A and B. But usually you always have the exclusion of symbolic properties. Whatever is the aesthetic, doesn't include the representational. So now the Collingwoodian approach to expression could lead us to put the things in these terms. Okay, any of these properties in their formal arrangement can be the subject of proper expression. So any emotion of our even political emotions could be the matter for true expression. And, sorry, what I try to do with this is the following. Okay. Consider that discussion about. I should end. Okay. I'm not going to go through the Goodman thing. So just to say one thing. We could use this to think more economically about a problem in aesthetics, the following sort. Elegance, or the paradigmatic aesthetic properties that are treated like, for instance, like metaphors. Consider a simple metaphor. I'll take an example from a Goodman paper in answering Donald Davidson. The lake is sapphiric. Okay, the lake is a blue. The alpine lake is a sapphire. Okay, in order to understand this, do you have to posit some extra layer of reality in which there is a property of saphiricness for lakes? No. What you do is, the metaphor is organizing your experience of literal properties of the lake. It's blue, it's coruscant, iridescent, etc. So what it's doing is you can see the kind of organization, the epistemic gestalt introduced by the metaphor, as exactly an example of Collingwoodian expression, as I've been trying to articulate. So the idea is that we could use this framework to explain things in aesthetic. I hope this has been at least enticing or stimulating in some way. I have to stop here because we're out of time. Ďakujem.
So the question and answer part should start right now.
Okay.
Since I got messages from online people, they had some issues with hearing and seeing properly the PowerPoint presentation, unfortunately. But anyway, we, as the audience inside, nice room, thanks to the Department of Institute of Philosophy for sharing with us. We can have a question, of course, to the speaker, so please raise your hands virtually or in the present here to ask the speaker about whatever interested you in that, or you need any more explanation about things that we have been said to the audience. Yes, please, Pani Profesorka.
I have a heavy question, heavyweight question. If I understood properly, they have been said that expression has nothing to do with emotions. So what expression is?
No. The thesis is not.
I need explanation.
Okay. The thesis is not that expression has nothing to do with emotion. Is that it's not restricted to emotion in the sense of, okay, those things about which we discuss, okay, love, hate, envy, that have phenomenological component more and a cognitive component. Envy makes sense if you have certain beliefs, etc. No, what I'm trying is to widen expression. For instance, I have this discussion in the paper with a colleague precisely about Debussy's little piece, the voile, and because he has an issue with me describing. We are discussing Goodman, and he has an issue with me describing musical fluttering. I call the qualities we experience in that piece, which are partly based on those musical features of the old tone scale, etc., musical fluttering. When I say he has an issue with this expressing musical fluttering, that's not the appropriate sort of thing you have to bring to expression. Expression is about emotion. So I'm not saying it's not about emotion, like full-fledged emotion. I'm saying it's wider. It's emotion and then some. So I'm aligning myself with David Collins, who is currently working on this version of, you could call it a neo-Collingwoodian approach to expression, which treats expression as expression of perspectives. So I express a perspective of an embodied cognitive agent in a certain situation. So that counts as expression. It's not just love, rage, hate, etc. So it's not. The idea is not to restrict, not to deny, not to exclude emotion. It's just to include more things. So.
More things, and cognition is one of them.
Well, emotional. You could talk, Collingwoodian terms. You could speak of emotional charges on cognition. There's this interesting passage in the earlier paper, or I think it's an earlier paper. Collingwood writes on form and content in art, and he speaks about the romantic type and the classical type. So, the passion of the classical type for form, and he defines the romantic as that the kind of artist that expects the content to give power and interest to the work. So, okay, there is a moment in the paper where he speaks about, okay, because the romantic painter falls in love with the sitter, the classical painter is in love with his work, something like that. And this could be misconceived in terms of, oh, he's a passionless painter. No, he's not a passionless painter. His passion resides somewhere else. And then also, another point he makes is you can be romantic about all sorts of things. For instance, you can look at the completely abstract painting, and you can be romantic about geometrical forms, so the relations of forms in space. So what I'm trying to say with this is, okay, yes, cognition to this extent. It's not, but it's not. Not cognition in terms of propositional knowledge. Okay, but yes. Yeah.
I have only one note that in the 21st century, I think that there is nobody who believes that there is some sense to speak about form and content.
I don't.
Mainly
No, I don't. I don't follow that. It's,
yes.
If you remember the slide.
Speaking about content
I know.
and form.
I wrote a paper. Okay.
Form in music means something else.
I know that, but
Of the context of this.
Can I just say, I will have no time, but I wrote a paper on the distinction between form and content not making sense, although it is in Portuguese.
I'm curious.
Yes. Because it has to do with the ways of conceiving form in art. And because I go this way. Usually people say, okay, content, okay, you are a cognitive or a cognitivist or a formalist. So if you're a cognitivist, you associate the cognitive element with content. And if you're a formalist, you associate, okay, the value with form. What I say is, no, the cognitive value in that lies in form. Okay? But this is a...
It's tricky, especially in music. Thank you.
I know.
It's tricky in music, but I have another question to ask.
Yeah.
Since first of all, thank you for the talk, and it was really stuffed with information. So sometimes it was really hard to follow, but we tried, right, our best. I really like the idea about constant struggle. Because we are constantly struggling with art, that's true. But I would propose to add something to art is expression of aesthetic ideas. Instead of talking about emotions, expression that are embodied emotions, maybe sometimes also.
Embodied mood.
Yeah. So let's talk about Kantian point of view, right? Because expressing art is expression of aesthetic ideas. So can we find a fitness for this?
I guess you could use the ideas, aesthetic ideas,
Yes.
to convey more or less what I'm calling perspectives. I don't think that is that far fetched.
Yeah, but me as I'm adapting this Kantian approach to contemporary art, and it's not so easy, let's say, but it's from my point of view, it's perspective. So I'm struggling with this emotions that can be added to propaganda, to any other things that can influence us through the art, but at the other side, they dishonor to the art being art.
Yeah, I think that not all within the class of what we call political art,
Yes.
you get different sorts of objects.
Yeah.
Okay. You can get objects that they are followings, they are performing some political function. They can even be working as propaganda, in a wide sense of the term. But some of them can be exactly like a completely hollow injunction. Okay, you look at the mural. Okay, I tend to use this example. If you go to Berlin and go to the former ministry, where the first headquarters of the GDR was, you have this huge mural that seems to depict a religious procession. So I contrast that sort of almost what do you call it, religious illustration. It's completely purely through going didactic. But you can, just like you can have examples of religious art where there's so much more going there than simply trying to produce in you devotional states of mind. There is more. There's like a gap through which what I call the spark of something else, and it's connected to this Aretaic structure in the sense that there's a room, because you are still searching for what counts as hitting the bullseye there. So there are works. You compare different types of political mosaic in art in public space. You can see examples where there is room for the imagination to wander and to articulate what it is from a certain perspective, like what it is to see the world from that perspective. Okay, consider some person who actually, take the case of this artist, like you have one of these names, major names of socialist realism in the Soviet Union, Alexandra Dyneka. Okay? I'm not applying this to all of his works. In some, because of the way he adhered to the credo, there's something else that his work can perform besides trying to conscript you to this, which is give you imaginative understanding of what it is like to see the world from that perspective and embrace that sort of vision and even tolerate or endure the sort of hardships he endured for the sake of that vision. So, I mean, it's human experience. It's like, okay, having been through the Gulag, you see, it articulates something valuable about human experience. Apart from the fact, if you're forgetting the fact that you're not, It's not about, of course, but it has this other layer, of this other function, which is it's there to celebrate something, to memorialize some or whatever, but you can still see in there something is alive. It's not just a dead body in the form of an injunction pulling you in another direction. I'm not sure if I'm making myself clear. So,
yeah. I got the point. One question coming from the online audience.
Online Liza by sa chcela zrejme opýtať, tak neviem, či to, skedy by išiel ten zvuk asi tu od toho.
Let's try, Liza.
Hi, Vito.
Hi.
Vito,
Yeah, we
can
can.
you hear me?
Yes, we can.
You can or not? Can you hear me there?
I can hear you.
Okay, hi, nice to see you. Great. So, I think my question comes from that I really follow each sentence of your talk because the sound wasn't continuous. Sometimes it was interrupted, and I couldn't also see the PowerPoint because it's blurry. So this is going to be basically a clarification question. I was very interested in talking about virtues and this Aretaic model, and I was wondering if you were willing to tell us more on how virtues enter in this whole picture, because I really lost the connection between cognitivism, expressivism, and virtues. But this is again probably because I couldn't really, hear what you were saying properly, so that's why. But if you can just, because I'm interested in the topic of virtues, aesthetics, and art, and I think that would be the region to develop such a conception that you mentioned. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, I call it, I call it Aretaic in the sense that so successful attainment of expression is also successful attainment of understanding. The artist is trying to understand, and so will the audience be trying to understand. So it's a shared task, and the connection I was going to try to do with to make with Goodman is that, for instance, there is not one single predetermined way of determining the meaning or the point of a work. Think of the form of a work of art as a set of elements of relationships between elements, and then you have to look at how those components relate and get at the point. What was the point of the work? But the artist, in producing the work, he is also trying to discover what the point really is. That's why, in many, more often than not, artists go back and redo and rework what they have done until they discover. So all this process is dependent on a set of abilities, which on the wide Aretaic model will coincide with the virtues, the intellectual virtues for the reliabilist in epistemology, and on the sort of narrower model that I was proposing will involve also virtues that would be the sort of virtues appealed to by the responsibilist. Okay, I'm drawing this connection in a sketchy manner, which is it has to be worked further on. So, if trying to use this to clarify the nature of creativity, for instance, would be a way to go. What's the role played? I don't know if this is enough to establish a connection with virtue. So the point. Okay, let me try. You can see more clear the role of virtue when you contrast it with the teleological model. Okay, and precisely, yeah, that's it. That's It's an act of discovery which you undergo, and the heart. I would say that the connection to virtues lies precisely on that structural element of you are searching for what counts as hitting the bullseye. And this is, there's no one way to do this. And this, okay, imagine, different artists could have different approaches to how would be the best way to complete this work here, how to give final accomplishment to this thought here. So, and there is not a single answer. It will be, you probably can have more than one virtuous answer to it.
So, yeah, I mean, I understand, and I think that the notion of virtue can be interesting, especially because it allows this kind of flexibility that you are searching for. So you cannot say that applying virtue means the same thing in all different cases, because in every different case, let's say of a work of art, in the art case, being virtuous means something different, depending on the context. And this is allowed by the system of virtues, also traditionally meant by Aristotle's sense of the term. But I was wondering whether you are mentioning, whether you think that something like an aesthetic virtue exists, or you are referring to like intellectual virtues, moral virtues, as they apply to art.
No, I'm going the opposite. I'm going the opposite way of. Yeah, I'm going the opposite way of people like Woodruff. Like the whole idea of this is that you don't need that you're not needing to posit special aesthetic virtues, because like combinations of the other virtues are enough. So it's really the structure. The idea is to put the burden on the Aretaic structure of expression, and not without positing. Okay, because this goes back to another discussion, which is virtue theories of aesthetics as they have appeared in piecemeal fashion since the early 2000s. They are actually teleological theories that appeal to virtues as maximizers of value. The underlying frame is teleological, is not what I call Aretaic proper. So also the idea of appealing to this narrow model was to distinguish, make that distinction.
Okay, thank you, Lisa, for your question. Thank you for the answers. And since the time is really running, I want to thank once again to our speaker for interesting talk, and we are really sorry for the technical quality of the transmission, since it was last time it was a quick exchange of room before it started. So, but luckily there's a pro camera recording all this talk and question and answer part, so it will be available later on YouTube to replay and to follow. And Vitor will be certainly happy to receive questions after this talk from students, from the colleagues. So once again, thank you so much for